Can I ask a physics question?
Sure.
Does energy exist?
Only virtual energy. Energy does not exist.
So it's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, just like light is a metaphor. This is a computed reality. Okay? When it's computed, think of it as a big simulation. Now, we could simulate a stick of dynamite exploding. Right? We could have a simulation, or we could have a fuse, and we could simulate the fuse burning, and then when it gets to where the, I don't know, whatever it is, the C4 or the gunpowder in the old days is, it would light and that would start to burn, and as it burned, pressure would go up, and it would start to push the other gunpowder around, and some of it would burn and some of it wouldn't, and some of it would run out of oxygen because it would all be burned up, and then others would come and the blast would go through various contortions and pressure wave would go out. All that can be calculated. All that can be simulated. That's simulated energy. We can simulate energy. So all of the energy is simulated. This is a virtual reality. So in a virtual reality game, in the World of Warcraft, you can maybe push a big rock over a hill and it'll roll downhill and it'll crush things on the way. It's all simulated. That's energy. That's even gravitational energy. And the rock probably even rolls at the right speed for that slope of a hill and that rock and whatever, because that's all calculated. And that's energy. It's just the results are calculated. All we get here are the results. So the results are the only thing that needs to be calculated. So all energy is virtual. There is no such thing as we're talking about energy. There is no such thing as action at a distance. There are no fields. Who was it? John Archibald Wheeler made the statement that, he says, first, I thought it was all particles. Now, he goes back to Bohr and Einstein even. He was a young scientist then. He says, first, I thought it was all particles. Then, I thought it was all fields. Now, I think it's all information. And indeed, he was right the last time. There are no such thing as fields. There is no action at a distance. These are just parts of the rule set. The rule set says if this happens here, something else will happen over there. If I have a charge and I do this with it here, I will be able to measure the effects of that over there on another charge. And there will be a time delay of the speed of light, which is native to any virtual reality. Every virtual reality, including the World of Warcraft, has an upper limit on the speed that can be moved. You can move 1 pixel of distance for 1 pixel of time. That's the fastest as things can travel through that reality. For us, that's the speed of light.
So it's a rule set for this particular
it's a
virtual
rule set
reality.
for this particular virtual reality, how things work that way.
So outside of the virtual reality is where the larger consciousness system
The only thing that's
resides.
fundamental is consciousness itself, and any reality frame where there is experience, any experiential reality frame is a virtual reality. Because experience comes from context and rules. So interaction comes from rules. Experience comes from rules.
So for lack of a better word, the larger consciousness system actually exists outside of the matrix. That's not what I mean, but that's the word I'm going to use.
Yeah, it's the creator of the matrix.
That's right.
It's the creator of the matrix.
That's right.
Yes.
So can you define, not give the attributes of, but define what intent is?
Intent.
Intent.
Okay. Intent is I guess in physics terms, I'd say it's the motive force, the only motive force within consciousness. It's what makes things happen. Intent in the consciousness system is a you can call it a thought. It's also, you can call it a motivation.
It's the why.
It's the why. Yeah, it's the thing that motivates. It's a thing that makes something happen. That's the intent. It's the energy, if you will, in thought space, not in physical space. It's the thing that can modify, can change. So that's intent. That's why intent drives everything. Your intent to communicate, your intent to meet the larger conscious system, your intent to modify future probability when you're healing with your mind. Everything comes from intent, because intent is what changes things. So if there's any energy that's, that is not virtual, it's intent within consciousness.
Could you say that intent then is the consciousness equivalent of force in the physics model?
Well, probably more energy than force, but yes.
Does that explain the observer effect?
Yeah. Well, the observer effect is easily explained if this is a virtual reality.
Sorry to record. No, I was just saying, if you could say that the intent in consciousness is the equivalent of force in the little model, the physics model.
It's close, yeah, kind of an equivalent to that. Force and energy. Yeah, go ahead.
Does that explain the observer effect in physics?
Yeah, the observer effect in physics is because in a virtual reality, all the reality exists in the mind of the observer. There is no reality outside the mind of the observer. When you are playing World of Warcraft and you got an elf and he's running through the trees fighting with monsters, okay, the player is the consciousness. There are no streams and trees and rocks and monsters. They only exist in the mind of the player, who interprets them from a data stream. He gets a data stream, he looks at a lot of little points of light on a screen, he interprets them as monsters and rivers and streams and rocks and elves and so on. And that whole reality of those elves only exists in the minds of the players. When there are no players, everybody's logged off. There is no reality, you see? So the observer effect is that unless a conscious being observes it, doesn't exist. It can't exist without a conscious, because reality is in the mind of the observer. So if it's not in the mind of the observer, then it doesn't exist. Now, when things do get in the mind of the observer, so something happens, okay, once that's here, then that stays here. Okay, so once I do something, say I put this table here and I put this thing on it, and there it is. Now you guys come into the room and you see it. All right, now that's a fact of here, and it stays here because it's been observed. So it becomes part of the scenery. Same in World of Warcraft. Once somebody makes a pile of rocks someplace, then everybody else that comes by will see that pile of rocks, because now that's there. But it doesn't mean that it's real. So that's the observer effect. And it depends on uncertainty. Where there is a lot of uncertainty, the way the system works, if somebody looks in a telescope up at the sky, and it's a brand new telescope that sees further than any other, so they're going to look and they're going to see something that's never been seen before, right? A lot of uncertainty. You don't know what you're going to see there. What the system does to find out what's going to be there, because there really is no sky. There isn't, all it's a virtual sky, right, with virtual stars and so on. It only gets made up when it has to be sent to an individual. It doesn't exist until some individual makes a measurement. So what there is there's a potential of a lot of things that could be there. So let's say there's 100 things that could be there when that telescope comes online and the guy looks there. Well, those 100 things are put in a distribution. It's a probability distribution of the possibilities. All these possibilities, 100 possibilities, and the likelihood of them. Now that likelihood is affected by what have we seen in that vicinity and what's likely to be there. See, there's just possibilities and the probability that they're there. That we're going to see, dancing pink elephants and tutus is not in that list of things, because they're not out in outer space in great numbers anyway. So that's not going to be there. But there will be other things that we could see there. And, all right, The guy puts his eye to the eyepiece, he looks, he takes the picture. A random draw is taken from that probability distribution of the possibilities, and that's what he sees. And now that is here because it's come in through the mind of a player. Anybody else looks at that spot is going to see the same thing. And what they see in the spot next to it is going to have to be compatible with what's there. So now the spot next to it has fewer possibilities because we know that it's going to have to be continuous with what's already been seen. So it's got a shorter list of possibilities and so on. And it just builds like that. So it becomes a part of the map after it becomes into a consciousness. So that's the observer effect. The observer is actually creating the reality with his measurement in the sense that he gets a random draw from the distribution of the possibilities. Sometimes that random draw will pick a 1 in a 10,000 out, a real low probability. Something strange comes out. Well, that happens sometimes, but still, it was a possibility. So we get a strange one. That strange one then may alter all the things around it, and they'll have to fit with that strange thing. But most of the time, you get the stuff that's most likely. The suns, the galaxies, the stuff that you expect to see out there is kind of typical. So that's the way reality is done, and it's done on a local scale as well. You go out of town for a month, you come home, you walk in your apartment, you're thirsty, you go to your refrigerator and open the door, and there's only 3 beer in your refrigerator. Could have been 4, could have been 5, could have been 8, you don't know. You haven't been home for a month. You usually only keep 3 or 4 or 5 and maybe only 6-pack at a time, so the probability that there would be like a case is very small. The probability that there wouldn't be any is maybe very small because you always keep some beer around, you see. But how many are there is unknown. So there's this probability distribution. And when you pull that refrigerator door open, a random draw is taken out of that probability distribution, and that's how many beer are in your refrigerator. You see, that's a measurement. So it not only works on the grand scale, on the everyday scale, and that's what drives quantum mechanics. That's why you have the measurement problem and the observer issue in quantum mechanics. It's the same thing. Until the measurement's made, that means until there's observer, it's not real. It's just potential. It hasn't come into this reality yet.